Welcome to ongoing election coverage by Town Meeting Television. This is 22 forums being brought to you in advance of the general election in November. All candidates on the ballot are invited to participate in Town Meeting TV forums to introduce you to community decision makers and connect you with issues that shape your local community. Today, we are in part 2 of the two-part forum for 2020 candidates for Chittenden County State Senate. If you're watching this live, we welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. You can also watch Town Meeting TV on Comcast Channel 1087, Burlington Telecom Channel 17 and 217, as well as online at Town Meeting TV's YouTube page. So we'll begin with opening statements. You'll each have a minute to introduce yourself, tell us why you're running and what experience you'll bring to the position. And I'll begin with Mr. Kumulia Long.
Thank you, Kristine. So my name is Kumulia Long. Some of you know me as Kase. I grew up in the Burlington area, later went to Essex where I graduated, played semi-professional football locally, later joined the military where I served 2 combat tours, came back, opened a real estate business, and here we are now. The reason I am running is because I recognize that...
All right, we're good.
I recognize that there were some things going on that needed attention. I had some questions, and in my attempt to better understand those questions, I realized that there was a voice that wasn't being heard. I didn't feel my voice was being heard, and in that, I know that I am not alone. I am running because it's my intent to be the voice of those people who are not being heard. I want all of Chittenden County to know and understand that I am here to be that voice for them and represent them in Montpelier.
Thank you. Senator Pearson.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Chris Pearson. I'm finishing up my second term in the Senate. I served previously in the House. And rather than talk about campaign promises, I thought today I would just talk about my record and the record of the Senate. We just adjourned for an exceptional, the longest session in history just yesterday evening. And I'm very proud of the work we've done. We have a lot more to do, obviously, but quickly in a snapshot, it's always dangerous to leave things out, but I'll do my best. In the last couple of years, of course, we responded vigorously to the COVID crisis, getting over $1 billion of federal money out into the Vermont economy. And I was among many voices trying to push that money down into Vermonters' pockets and also into small businesses, self-employed, not just our larger employers. The Senate and the legislature passed a reproductive health guaranteeing right to abortion to all Vermont women. We managed to increase the minimum wage over the governor's veto. We just last week, I think it was, passed a significant climate bill allowing us to set goals for emission reductions, again, over the governor's veto. We, in the last couple of sessions, have passed significant gun safety measures. We've passed paid family leave, although that was vetoed and we couldn't override that. We created dedicated water funding to clean up our lakes and rivers. We have a permanent increase in the base pay for mental health workers in Vermont. We passed some of the most significant criminal justice reform packages in decades. We're the first state to formally petition Congress under their rules to reimport drugs from Canada.
1 minute.
And we've passed a bill to expunge cannabis records. We passed pro-consumer contract protections. We have the most aggressive lead testing.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to have to cut you off there.
On and on and on. Thank you.
In order to stay on time here, we'll move on to Ms. Kesha.
Thanks, Mayor Lott. I guess it helps, I think, just to start by congratulating the House and Senate on adjourning last night and doing an incredible job carrying Vermonters through an incredibly challenging time. I'm Kesha. I served 8 years in the House and am running to be your next Chittenden County State Senator. Ballots were out in the mail today. So, one of the issues that's nearest and dearest to me is that people feel enfranchised. They trust government, they know how to participate in government, and they can get out to vote. If you voted in the primary or otherwise registered, you should get your ballot by October 7th. If you, for some reason, don't get your ballot, you can check on the Vermont Secretary of State's website. If any of that is challenging, I am happy to give you my contact information. I can be reached at kesharom.com and would love to help make sure that you can vote. If you don't get your ballot by October 7th, it might mean they don't have you in the system, and you should register to vote with the Secretary of State and get your ballot. You can still vote on November 3rd, which is Election Day. I stand for economic, racial, and social justice. I would be the first woman of color in the state Senate and the youngest woman in history, and I'm happy to talk more about my platform.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas Chittenden.
Great, thank you. So I just want to first of all start by thanking Town Meeting TV and Mayor Lott for hosting this important event today. Providing opportunities for voters to hear from candidates like myself is an essential service to a functioning democracy. So thank you very much for this time and platform. So I'm Thomas Chittenden, and I decided to run last spring because over the last 10 years or so, I have not heard enough of our elected leaders advocating for Vermont to grow. I want our elected leaders in Montpelier to take steps to address and challenge our demographic challenges by embracing policies that encourage more people to stay, live, move, and work and thrive here in the great state of Vermont. I also decided to run because I believe that our counties and our state need to start regionalizing more of our services to get better outcomes at lower costs. We can do this. We can do better if we align our public services more around population centers instead of along invisible town boundaries drawn before the automobile age. I believe I'm qualified for this role based on my leadership experience. I am a third term currently serving South Burlington City Councilor. I currently serve as the elected Faculty Senate President at the University of Vermont. I'm the immediate past chair of the Green Mountain Transit Board. So I believe I have relevant experience to tackle the problems facing our state, and I'm committed to making Vermont more affordable and more attractive to investment, opportunity, and people.
Thank you. And Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you, Kristine. I want to thank you and Channel 17 for this opportunity. And we have very few opportunities like this. And it's very hard for voters to discern among 13 candidates. So opportunities like this help. And I hope later on I can get into my role and Senator Pearson's role in breaking up the Chittenden County District so the voters could get closer to their senators. It's critical importance, and it will happen in 2 years from now, and how that's structured is very important. I have served 3 full terms in the Senate and another year as I was appointed by Governor Shumlin to replace my late wife, Sally Fox, in the Senate. And I just want to say that on my swearing in, I was approached by the newspapers. I wasn't even expecting to be approached by the newspapers. They said, "So what do you want to achieve here in the Senate?" And I wasn't ready, but it came to me very quickly that my highest priority was income inequality. And I think since I got into the Senate and up until this year, and even up until last night, I have been working under the guidelines, guideposts of correcting income inequality in our country, in our state. I was the lead sponsor and lead reporter, leader in the Senate on minimum wage. I was the lead sponsor, lead reporter, and leader in the Senate on paid family leave, and I am a leader on affordable housing in the Senate. And I hope to continue in this role. I am uniquely situated being chair of the Economic Development and Housing Committee, and it's a job I love, and it's I think it's totally consistent with.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Now that we have had our introductions and opening statements, we will move into questions. I would like to start by asking each of you your position on the budget, how you would use your seat in the Senate to address our state budget. What are your priorities? What do you bring to the table as far as cuts, raise revenue, redistribution? How would you approach that? So I'm going to start with Senator Pearson this time.
Great, thank you. Well, I supported the budget this last time, and a few months ago we passed a small budget for part of the year. I supported that, and I think that we try hard to make sure that the needs of working families are addressed. There is a lot of poverty. We've seen in the last several months food insecurity become front and center with miles of lines of cars and across the state lined up to get prepared meals as the pandemic hit. there's real pain in our state. The median household income is about $55,000 in the state. That means half of Vermonters live in households earning less than $55,000. That is something we've got to address. Senator Sirotkin talks about inequality. The one thing that I'd like to do moving forward that we haven't been able to be aggressive enough on, in my opinion, is really look at a tuition-free program. We have got to create this opportunity for so many Vermonters, particularly in our rural areas, where higher education is out of reach. Young people are graduating with extraordinary amounts of debt, and we are really breaking a promise of hope and a better future for too many young people. I saw a group of 8th graders in the State House once, and I asked them, I'm curious, how many of you think your parents are stressed about paying for college? This was a number of years ago. And the amount of hands that went up in 8th grade was really startling. I know that those kids are potentially not trying as hard as they could in high school because they know it's out of reach for them. And I think we're cheating our future that way. So I think that would be a priority that I'd like to see us focus on in terms of state budget and state spending.
Thank you. I will move to Ms. Romm.
Thanks, Mayor Lott. Just to build off of what Senator Pearson said, the ink isn't dry on their budget, but I believe there was an increase for the Vermont State Colleges in this budget. Your budget really is your moral document. It's your guiding compass. It's how you set your general priorities. And I often say about being a legislator that I think there's really only 3 ways that we do truly impact Vermonters' lives. And that is to advance a civil right, to change the criminal code, or to get something in the budget. And so having spent, several years in the House on Ways and Means, where we try to figure out how to raise revenue and what it's going to pay for, I think that's the most important part of the question of what do I support? Do I support more revenue? The question is, what do we need to fund? And right now we know Vermonters are desperately hurting. We know some have done better than others, and that there are still resources available in our state. I think we need a budget that truly uplifts young Vermonters, that uplifts new Americans, that helps people who want to live and thrive and stay in our state to get the support they need. I would often support things like tax credits so that we could provide new homeowners their first opportunity to buy a home. So how do we really get surgical with our budget and look at the ways that Vermonters are trying to stay here? Vermonters between $40,000 and $60,000 of income, Vermonters who are having children for the first time. How do we make sure that they are fully supported in the budget to stay here? Otherwise, frankly, we're going to lose them to other states that feel more affordable.
Thank you. Mr. Chittenden.
Thank you. So I have a 3-pronged answer to this question because it was sort of framed that way. But I'd say that I believe we can achieve better outcomes at lower costs through economies of scale achieved by regionalizing some public services. Elsewhere in this country, county-based governance has a larger role in coordinating public services. I believe Vermont has been missing opportunities to organize important public functions like fire, police, wastewater, stormwater, municipal amenity planning, and many other services around population centers framed by our county delineations. I also believe we can raise more revenue by growing our economy, using use-based assessments achievable through proven technologies like toll by plate, and through new revenues from out-of-state-based internet services, which could use our broadband networks without currently contributing to our tax base. The near-term budget crunch of $100 million looking at for next year, that shortfall from this COVID recession will limit our ability to increase spending and will likely demand some allocation based on our principles. And I really like how you framed that, Kesha, when you said that the budget is a moral compass of where our priorities are. And I hope that comes true next year during the really tough times that we're looking at.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I serve on the Economic Development and Housing Committee, but I also serve on the Finance Committee, which is the Revenue Committee in the Senate. And we have an opportunity to get into taxes. And I have a background in law and accounting, so I sort of feel I function in an auditing role as well. So not necessarily drawing a decision on whether to raise taxes or lower taxes. I'm constantly on the lookout for loopholes and problem areas where people are avoiding taxes, and we can get better enforcement. And just to give you 2 quick examples of millions of dollars that we've uncovered in the Finance Committee is stockbrokers, tens of thousands of stockbrokers around the country have to pay a fee to do business with Vermonters, and they were being charged a tiny, tiny, minuscule rate compared to other states. When we uncovered that, we were able to raise quickly $3 million for added services. And last year, we had a situation where Stowe Mountain was sold. All the real estate, all the property around Stowe was sold. So I went to the treasurer's office and said, so we must be getting a lot of property transfer tax revenue. And they said, no, because they didn't do it by deed. They did it through some corporate documents. And I mentioned this to my son, who's also a tax lawyer. And he said, well, in New York, they have a law that that deals with exactly that, where you can't bypass that kind of situation. And now we have all these mountains that have been sold, like Mount Snow, Killington, Okemo, and now we are collecting taxes when those transfers take place.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Mr. Long.
Thank you. So I feel that the current budget at $7 billion is out of control. The growth of that budget over the last 10 years is it's outpacing Vermonters' ability to really support that bill. As we sit here and we say that we care about Vermonters and we care about the middle to low income individuals, I struggle to see how that's the case when I'm looking at my property tax bill and I'm seeing an increase. I question whether or not there are other creative solutions to solve these problems. For instance, the reformation of Act 250. If we expand our grand list, or if we make Vermont a more inviting place for small business, we can create jobs. We can take the revenue and utilize the revenue from the increased grand list to help support some of these budget shortfalls. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We really need to sit down. We need to look at the budget, and we need to analyze where we are and where we're supposed to be. We are all going to have to make sacrifices, and we are all going to have to buckle down. But we need to see what programs, systems, and that we have in place, and really evaluate how effective they are, and if they're actually doing the things that we intended them to do. We need to evaluate those systems, and we need to make adjustments as needed so that we can support that budget, so that we can then follow through with this promise to support the mid to low income individuals, to provide those opportunities for housing and income and so on and so forth. That's my
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Let's move now to healthcare, another very important hot topic in Vermont. The COVID pandemic has sharpened our focus on inequities in healthcare and healthcare costs and how those are impacting individuals. Do you believe healthcare is a human right? And how would you use your position in the Senate to address the healthcare needs of Vermonters? I'm going to start with Kesha Ram this time.
Thanks, Mayor. So yes, the short answer is I believe in a civil society where we want to see people succeed and do well, where we're in a democracy and we believe in the importance of every individual. Then everyone should have access to healthcare, and it should be a right. In fact, my great-great-grandfather was the chief engineer of India and used his money to create some of the first universally available hospitals in India. Sir Gangaram Hospital in Delhi has mobile healthcare that treats people all over the region. So, we in many ways also don't want to fall behind other countries in our promise to Americans and what it means to take care of each other. I fully support advancing what we have now, which is the all-payer waiver. I was a supporter of universal unified healthcare as we were working towards it. I know there's a lot of efforts to try and create greater access. And I really applaud what it sounds like I heard from Senator Pearson, that was an increase for mental health supports in the budget, because parity between physical and mental health should not be, should be as great a priority as we can imagine right now, as we see how isolated people are, and we should really be able to recognize how important that is. So, I would continue to do whatever I could to expand our access to healthcare, make sure that we're drawing down federal resources to the extent possible, and not shifting the cost burden around so that people feel more and more underinsured, which is one of our greatest problems. And I think even many of us face a situation where we feel like between our deductibles and our out-of-pocket costs, we're highly underinsured and we don't really understand what we're paying for. So the more we can stair step people into better care and better access, I will support that.
Thank you. Mr. Chittenden.
So I'm with Bernie Sanders on this one. Healthcare is a human right, and I think this country needs to do healthcare differently. It starts by separating healthcare from employment, and that takes time. A single payer model makes the most sense, but getting there is the challenge. And on this, I don't think Vermont can do it alone. I think we've learned that over the last few years. I'd like to see us start to explore interstate regional compacts with New York, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, and more to move us towards a model proven to be efficient and fair in other developed countries. I'd also just say ditto to Kesha there. So great answer.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin.
Healthcare should be a human right. I support all payer. I would support single payer, and I would support the comments of the previous two candidates in that we can't do it alone. We saw that in the Shumlin administration. That was the boldest attempt by any state to get there, and it finally fizzled, much to many of our dismay. So I think we'd have to join the rest of the civilized developed world and not have a system of health insurance, just health care. And so I think the time has come, but whether it's through multi-state compacts or more probably through changing approach in Washington, that's going to be our best hope to get there, but I do support it.
Thank you. Mr. Long.
Can I say ditto? So, I agree with the previous speakers in regards to, healthcare is a right, especially as a. That being said, from speaking with residents within Chittenden County, it's my understanding that the issue with healthcare is the cost, and that it is extremely expensive. So that's great. You have the right and you are entitled to healthcare. However, it does you no good if you can't afford it. I know that we've established the Green Mountain Care Board, and that was established in order to drive costs down and make things more affordable, regulate costs through the Accountable Care Organization, so on and so forth. And I guess this kind of takes me back to the budget issue, in that we need to evaluate these boards, these systems, these programs that we have in place, why we put them in place, and are they doing the things that they are supposed to do or that they said that they were going to do. If they are not doing those things, we need to make adjustments. And if healthcare is unaffordable, then really what good is it to those individuals who truly need it?
Thank you. And Senator Pearson.
Thank you. I'll try not to be too boring and say I agree. Healthcare is a human right. And, not only is it criminal that we are not joined the rest of the advanced world in guaranteeing access to healthcare, but we spend far more than any other advanced country. Our neighbors 50 miles from here spend about half what we pay for healthcare. They get better outcomes. So it's very challenging. I think some of what we've been pushing are not whole-scale solutions, because I do think it's very challenging for us to weave together the federal program, which pays for a lot of our healthcare, and then try to say here in Vermont it'll be universal. That's been tricky. Just before the pandemic hit, we were debating vigorously in my committee, I also serve on Senate Finance, a bill that would give every Vermonter who had insurance access to 2 free primary care visits actually, the bill said all primary care would be cost share free. This is to go after the challenge that people have insurance and they still can't afford to go to the doctor. You have a kid who's sick and you're debating to yourself, geez, are they really sick? Because can I afford the $30 copay? Can I afford the next follow-up and the prescription drugs? This is insane. These people have insurance, to say nothing of the uninsured. We were getting close on moving something that would give you at least 2 free visits. Also, we've limited the price of out-of-pocket for insulin. So we're sort of nibbling around the edges. We also have just got to address the monopoly that the University of Vermont health system has on our health system and the driver in costs that they present. And it's been a very big challenge.
Thank you. A lot of agreement here on the priority of healthcare. I hope viewers are interested in that. I do want to pause and take a moment to remind folks that we are watching part 2 of the Chittenden County State Senate Candidates Forum on Town Meeting TV. And if you are watching live, you can call in with your own questions at 802-862-3966. The next topic that I'd like to put forward to you all is around climate change. Just in the news, series of bills in the House and Senate addressing climate change, including an act to establish a Green New Deal fund. Do you support climate change legislation, and how will you use your role as a senator to address the impacts of climate change on Vermonters? We can start with Thomas Chittenden.
Global warming is an existential threat to the human race, both current and future generations. We need to do things differently in both Vermont and in this country to reduce our CO2 emissions while meeting the needs of the current generation without sacrificing the ability of future generations to meet their needs. When I look at the state's carbon footprint, I believe we can get a lot more we could do a lot more if we start to align our public transportation infrastructure to incentivize the use of public pooled and high occupancy transport. An expression I heard, and I tried to attribute it with a Google search today, but I couldn't find it. But something that always resonates with me is tax what you don't like and subsidize what you do. I'm a proponent of doing something in Vermont that we used to do in Vermont that all of our neighbors do, and that are now using technology to do it in a much more efficient way. Use-based assessment is taxing what you don't like and subsidizing what you do. And the method of using toll by plate would actually give us a way to income sensitize so that the most vulnerable of Vermonters aren't negatively, disproportionately penalized by other taxes like the carbon tax. So I see opportunities for us to align our transportation infrastructure and how we pay for it to more directly address the CO2 emissions from the transportation activities within the state.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin, climate change.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Tom Chittenden for his role at Green Mountain Transit. He might not know the fact that for about 2 decades, I represented the Public Transit Association of Vermont when it was not a cause celeb to get more public transit in the state of Vermont. It's a tough nut to crack in such a rural state. But as you know, one of the big problems with the carbon footprint comes from transportation initiatives. So I applaud the governor and past governors in the effort to get more electric vehicles and more electric buses on the road. I applaud our transportation committee to get the TCI, Transportation Climate Initiative, up and running with 12 other states around us to do this jointly. And the Global Warming Solutions Act, which has just been passed by the House and the Senate, the governor vetoed it and both chambers overrode that veto. It's not too dissimilar to what we did with water quality. There's an organization in Montpelier called the Conservation Law Foundation, which had to sue the state to get the attention necessary to get the $60 million a year we now have going to clean up the lakes. The controversial portion of this bill was that it gave individual citizens the right to sue. It is a novel concept, though it exists in several other states, but without that threat and without definite goals to be met, things just get pushed further and further down the road. And it might be surprising for most people to know that our carbon footprint in the state of Vermont is much inferior to many of the states around us.
Thank you. Kumulia Long, climate change.
Thank you. So climate change is a real issue. And I believe that we have a responsibility to ourselves and to the future generation to do our part. That being said, I support Governor Scott's veto of this particular bill. I don't think that it is responsible for us to provide that opportunity for citizens to sue the state. If we're looking at accountability, lawsuits shouldn't be the case. The accountability should fall on the legislators who were elected by their constituents to do the things that they said that they were going to do and take care of those residents, the residents of that area. For me, I guess my thought is pollution. I'm thinking about Lake Champlain. I'm thinking about the revenue that we can receive through tourism. You know, the state has the ability to bond and create holding tanks for the wastewater and stormwater runoff during those times where they can hold that water, treat that water, and then safely, push it back into the lake. So while climate change is important, again, I guess it comes back down to Vermonters and what Vermonters need right now. Thank you, Kristine.
Thank you. Senator Pearson?
Thank you. This is an excellent question. And I think your question was, what would we do with our role around climate change?
That's right.
When I was in the House, one of the co-founders of the Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus. I was looking around that big red room, 150 legislators, and most of us agreed climate change was a serious threat, but we weren't doing very much about it. And so it was an attempt at that time to elevate the issue. And I see this year and the last couple of years as starting to pay that some of that fruit coming to pay off. Global Warming Solutions Act is not a lot more than a mechanism for accountability, but also a planning process where we bring experts in the room and say something the legislature has not been able to do. How are we going to meet the Paris Accord, for instance, the emission reductions? Most people don't know Vermont, compared to New England, has higher per capita emissions, and we have done less than our neighbors to reduce emissions since 1990. We are falling behind here. Global Warming Solutions is a piece of that. I was also the lead sponsor on a bill to get our grid to 100% renewable by 2030. That kind of got waylaid by the pandemic, but we'll be back at that. I think also I serve as the vice chair of the Senate Ag Committee, and I think regenerative agriculture is a great example, something that's not talked about a lot, to both strengthen our rural economy and sort of reinvigorate our farm economy and sequester carbon in the soil, build flood resilience. When you have healthy soils, you're much more resistant to flood, you're much more resistant to drought, and sort of allow us to be a regional, if not national, leader on this issue, because rural states across the country are facing the same challenges that our farmers face. Also, I've been part of one of the voices.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
A little over time.
Your signal, sorry.
Kesha Ram.
Thanks, Mayor. And, I'm sure Senator Pearson was going to say something else really valuable because he has done a lot of work on this issue. My particular lens on it, I think, does lend itself to lessons from both the pandemic and cleaning up Lake Champlain, that we can't wait until 200,000 people are dead, and disproportionately Black and brown people and people who already had health issues. We can't wait until we can see algal blooms in the lake before we do something about it and invest in it, because then it is truly too late. And if we don't make this a priority now, we will be paying for it later. And in fact, many people have always worried that our climate refugees would be from, South America or, somewhere that felt really far away, but it's probably going to be part of my family in California or people in Florida or New York City. So, we're already at the point where floods are destroying our coastal cities, where fires are ravaging, huge numbers of our American population. And we're fortunate in Vermont that we have fewer natural disasters. That should give us the opportunity and the time to plan, to prioritize, and to make a difference. In fact, just adding to what was said and really focusing on environmental justice, I would bring back the planning office in the state and make sure that disaster resiliency is a big focus of ours. In Hurricane Irene, 8% of the population were mobile home park residents, but they were 40% of those affected by Irene. So the people who will feel this first are already feeling it. They're living in mobile home communities. They're in other states on coastal waterways. They're lower income and they don't have the resources to move when these disasters strike. So we have to act now.
Thank you, Kesha. Moving on to our next topic. Racial justice is something that's been in the headlines both nationally and locally. H478, an act relating to establishing a task force to study and consider a state apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, will likely be reintroduced in the next biennium. Are reparations an appropriate response to white privilege? What ideas would you offer the task force? How should Vermont reckon with its history and institutions of racism? I'm going to start with Senator Sirotkin for this one.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a unique experience in this area. My law firm 25 years ago represented Homer St. Francis of the Abenaki, the chief of the Abenakis, and it was in a fishing rights claim, and we put in probably hundreds of thousands of pro bono dollars into representing the tribe to get them their rights to fish. They won the case at the district court. We flew in experts from Colorado to show the continuous occupation of northwestern Vermont by the Abenakis. In a somewhat strained decision, I think, the Vermont Supreme Court overturned that decision. But the natural result of that decision would have been a land rights claim to much of the land in Franklin County by the Abenakis. And it really hurt when I felt it wasn't given the true justice that I think that case deserved. So when you talk about things like correcting the past and apologies and reparations, I think apologies are a no-brainer, but I'm not sure that does the trick to solve the problem. I don't think it's good enough, for instance, in the case of the Abenakis, to have their name in Abenaki language under the English name in all the state parks. I don't think that's exactly what they're looking for in terms of relief. But I am glad that we're looking further into this issue of reparations and what form of reparations might take. The establishment of an Office of Racial Equity in the governor's office is a major first step. It gives a clear voice, and it needs to be further resourced. And I saw this firsthand.
Thank you, Senator. It sounds like you are supportive of the direction the legislation is going.
Yes.
I will move next to Mr. Long for this question.
Thank you. So I've lived in Vermont all my life, and I'm hearing things about systemic racism and institutional racism. I still don't understand what systemic racism is. I do understand institutional racism, but I don't know that that's necessarily what we're experiencing now. And again, that's just me from my perspective. What I do feel we have are institutions that we have racism within institutions, which then comes down to not necessarily attacking the institution, however, addressing those individuals that we have in those leadership positions, making decisions in those institutions. In regards to reparations, it's going to come down to, sure, the form, right? None of us were slave owners. I don't know any slave owners. I don't currently feel as though I am a slave, nor have I. I think if there's anything slave related, it might be a slave mentality that a lot of us experience. Reparations shouldn't come in the form of a check. What we need to do is look at education. It needs to start at the ground level, and it needs to be in education. I think we've all paid a price, and I think that we're all looking to do the same thing. And in order to correct the direction, it's not going to happen overnight, and it needs to start with education.
Thank you. Senator Pearson.
Thank you. This is a great question, obviously very timely. You don't get economic justice without racial justice. You don't get environmental justice without racial justice. These things are inexorably woven. I think Vermont should do more than we have done to push a reparations discussion at the national level. I think it does have to be a national discussion. Here in Vermont, I've been frankly pleased to see a very, very clear reaction to ever since the killing of George Floyd in the legislative arena. We have pushed more police reform in the last 4 or 5 months than I've seen in the last decade I've been there. We've put citizens in charge of law enforcement training and behavioral problems. We've banned chokeholds. We've banned training of chokeholds. We have expunged marijuana records, which will disproportionately help people of color. We have created a legal marketplace for cannabis. On and on and on. We have attempted to respond. We have loads more to do, but there have been significant first steps, and I welcome the conversation. I welcome the grassroots pressure that is bringing the conversation to Montpelier, and for sure, I know we have more work to do.
Thank you. Ms. Rum.
Mayor. So I don't think you can have reconciliation without truth. And I think that's where we are as a state and a nation. I was just with a group of young people the other day in high school, at Burlington High School. And to Senator Sirotkin's point, we were sitting in the old north end of Burlington, a site where many people were taken from their families and were forced sterilized, where University of Vermont was an academic and intellectual leader in the sterilization of people who were deemed imbecilic or in other ways indigent in the country. And that informed the Holocaust, it informed the Nazi regime. And we have more and more young Americans who don't believe that the Holocaust really happened. And we don't, teach history in a way that helps people understand that current law enforcement was originally an outcropping of trying to keep Black people in continual slavery and continually from accessing their rights and freedoms, including voting. And so when you put all of this together, if you don't have that truth, it's really hard for people to see why you need reconciliation. So I'm really grateful that people like former Representative Kaya Morris, who, by the way, was the only Black woman in the legislature and left due to harassment in her community, Bennington, where they tried to paint Black Lives Matter on the street and people were running up against AR-15s, where she has pushed since being a legislator to get more education in our schools. So yes, I believe we need reparations. I would hope that, I don't actually know if the final revenue in the marijuana bill spoke to ways to help formerly incarcerated Black individuals or advance Black home ownership, or if the revenue will be spoken for later when it comes in. But I do believe one of the best ways that we can get the resources to ensure reparations is from the legalization of marijuana.
Thank you. And Mr. Chittenden.
So I have an expression that always centers me, and it's that you cannot improve what you do not measure. And this act, H478, focuses, from my read of it, on measuring the impact today of our country's past immoral governance. For generations, including within the lifetime of living Vermonters, this country has had immoral governance, suppressing economic, personal, and political liberty of individuals based on their race. So to be honest with ourselves, we need to understand through transparent, reasoned, and scientific study the impact of those state-sanctioned practices on Vermonters today. That quantification should be part of our lens in developing our regulatory policy to create a more socially just Vermont. And I just want to say to Mr. Long, I completely agree when you said reparation should not be in the form of a check. It should be in the form of education. I really like that, and I agree completely.
Thank you. Moving to a topic that is near and dear to my town, I would like to ask you about F-35s. Now that Chittenden County is experiencing the flyovers of a full fleet of jets here, what, if anything, have you heard from constituents about noise, health, and safety impacts? What concerns might you have? I will start this round with Mr. Long.
Thank you. Former military. So while we were ground troops, the Air Force is a little bit different. But in regards to what I've heard, the concern seems to be the noise and then possible health concerns. I am not currently tracking any of the research that has been done in regards to the health issues that may come from these jets being in the air. However, it is my understanding that having the F-35s at the Burlington Airport is financially beneficial to Burlington Airport, both logistically as well as providing a defense capability to the area. And well, like in New York, they were one of the first responders to 9/11. So I understand the strategic placement of that particular base. However, I understand that there may be a noise concern. I was driving through Winooski and they can be pretty loud. But I think that's going to come down to having conversations about how we can mitigate some of that noise.
Thank you. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Mayor. I continue to oppose the F-35s, and one of the, it's not amusing, it's not the right word, but dynamics we saw as the Senate was working remotely for the last 6 months was the F-35s would take off, and Senator Lyons, who lives in Williston, would be speaking in the middle of floor debate, and she'd say, "Well, 1 second," and then she would come back on, and I would have to mute, and then Senator Ash and then Senator Baruth in the northern part of Burlington. Um, it was disruptive. Well, who cares? It was disruptive for a Senate hearing. Maybe that matters, maybe that doesn't. But it's really indicative of what it means to have that presence in the heart of our most populous area in Vermont. It's a real struggle. I worry about the health impacts. I worry about the kids' impact in schoolrooms. I don't think we have clear data on that. But I also think it's incumbent on us to be frank with Vermonters and say, I am not at this point seeing a way where the state government has a meaningful way of saying the F-35s have got to go. So, it's a struggle. They're here now. We have leadership at the sort of top of the ticket, if you like, in our congressional delegation and the governor's office that supports them. And at some level, I hope we continue to find mitigating strategies so that they're as least disruptive as possible.
Thank you. Kesha Ram.
Thank you. So have I heard about this lately? So I just got engaged the weekend after our primary election. And what does that have to do with F-35s? My florist for my wedding is a good friend named Kelsey Adams. She was just featured in 7 Days. She lives in Winooski and started West Lane, which is actually the name of her street. And we went over to her house to talk about the wedding because her garden in her backyard is where she does a lot of her work. And we were going to have dinner over there, socially distanced. And she just started to say, I'm going to maybe sound a little nutty, but the F-35s are so loud, it's going to affect our dinner. And so and as I understand it, a week every month around the F-35s come every evening. And I'm in Burlington, but at the same time, I have never felt like I've logged the decibel level that I did sitting in her backyard directly in the flight path, perhaps with the way the sound is next to the river and with the rest of Winooski up the hill. But we had to stop our conversation every 10 minutes for about 3 minutes. They explained to me that they have to get off of work calls, that they have to schedule their entire professions around the F-35s. I heard that from other friends as well afterwards. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to invite our Senate delegation and our House members over to like a small business gathering in her backyard, on one of those nights when the F-35s are coming over, because there's not a lot that you can do. And I don't think people realize that situation in Winooski. As Senator Pearson said, it's really hard for us to know what we can do. But what I've heard a lot is, well, even if we started soundproofing now, if we got a little bit of money each year, we'd only be able to do several houses at a time. I would start with those houses in that deep sort of sound pit that are experiencing high decibels where people can't sleep, kids can't sleep, car alarms go off. I would work on soundproofing right away, and the federal government has the money for it. So I hope we can make a concerted effort to start giving families relief.
Mr. Chittenden.
So this is an issue with very strong opinions on both sides. And in my 3 terms on the South Burlington City Council, this has been the most contentious issue before me in that role. I've lost many nights of sleep over this topic. And I will say this, I recognize the safety concerns related to this, and I've been a strong advocate for sound walls, for sound monitoring. I'm really excited with the recent grants that are now being in place so that we can start to get real data about the noise that the F-35s are creating, and other measures to operationalize improvements so that we can dampen ground noise. I am also a supporter of the basing of the F-35. I grew up in Chittenden County, and I've been proud to hear those planes run. And I am not one to want to get them out of this state. I think it's our duty as a part of the 50 states of this country to shoulder some of the risk and responsibilities of protecting it. So I am a supporter of the basing of the F-35, proudly so, but I simultaneously see opportunities for us to mitigate these concerns with measures that could have been put in place years ago. And that's where in these conversations, and I know Mayor Lott, we've had a short conversation on this that I'd love to continue. I believe the F-35s are here because of the flawed and dysfunctional governance over the Burlington International Airport. It is a municipal asset that resides outside of the city of Burlington in the city of South Burlington, where only the decision maker is the mayor of Burlington currently with his appointee. I believe we'd have better governance over that body and less of this friction if we regionalize that asset, just like many other airports have done across this country. I think it's well worth more consideration on that topic. And I hope if successful in November, we can have another conversation, Mayor Lott, about how to move forward better, more just decision-making over the airport.
Thank you. And Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have much to add to what Senator Pearson said, other than to add my own anecdotal story of the F-16s 4 years ago in a forum very similar like this in Winooski. We were doing like speed dating, and the issue of the F-16s came up. And lo and behold, right at that time, an F-16 flew over, and it really disrupted the conversation, not only for the couple of minutes that the plane was overhead, but in its approach and in its wake. It must have been like 6 minutes time where you couldn't actually continue the conversation. I've tried to help in where I could. People from South Burlington and from Burlington, big opponents of the F-35, asked me to help get meetings with Senator Leahy, and I did venture to do that. The big part of the problem is not just now where we are, but even before, is we have our entire congressional delegation, including Bernie Sanders, in lockstep in support of this. My late wife was from Omaha, Nebraska, not too far from SAC headquarters in rural Nebraska, and it's just nonsensical to me that a mission of this character is situated in a populated area like Chittenden County.
Thank you. For viewers, reminder, you are watching part 2 of the Chittenden County State Senate Candidates Forum on Town Meeting TV. If you are watching live, please give us a call, ask your question of the candidates, 802-862-3966. I'd like to now ask all of you more about your campaign. How are you connecting with your neighbors and potential constituents during these times? You know, we're facing sort of a different environment than years past where you just go door to door and meet people in coffee shops. So I'd like to hear how you are doing that outreach and connecting. And if you think that, you know, we are experiencing sort of a dividing point, and are you hearing really partisan politics like we see in the national environment? I cannot remember who I started with last, trying to give even time to everybody. I think I might be on Senator Pearson.
Sure, I'll give it a whirl. You know, well, I'll be frank and say, normally the legislature, maybe people don't know, goes January to mid-May. And a lot of us have other jobs and families and other obligations, but we're called to service in a sort of so-called citizen legislature. So right away, I have to just say we worked an extra 5 months this year working remotely during a pandemic. This has not been a normal year. And it has, on top of that, been an election year where all of us got through the primary in the middle of August, and then the Democratic ticket. That was a very contested event. So overlaid with the legislative work, that has been my focus. And so right out of the gate, I'll confess, I haven't done the campaigning that normally I would do because the legislature has been continuing until yesterday. I really miss walking around and shaking hands. I really, really miss that. I miss going to the farmer's market and finding people who are in a relaxed mode, who want to talk about priorities for Montpelier. I miss going door to door. I miss county, regional meetings. I missed the 4th of July parades. I've been trying to do my best through online tools, through some direct mail, through some phone calling, text messages, through my website. We have a small campaign. It's mostly run by me and some volunteers, but trying to make myself available. People can call me, as they know, and do call me all the time, email, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We just try hard to be available and hope that people feel a connection. Front Porch Forum has also been a big help. But if people have ideas, I'm all ears.
Thank you. Kesha Ram?
So I wish I was like on one of those shows like The Daily Show where I could reach behind my desk and pull out a Kesha mask. But, you know, a lot of people have masks or hats from our campaign around the county and beyond. And masks felt like a really nice way that we could help people be safe rather than, you know, a lot of folks do struggle if they need to put some in the wash, or they have a lot of disposable ones to keep up with making sure that they're safe and keeping other people safe. So that was something we never thought we would spend money on before the pandemic, that has turned out to be really invaluable. You know, and I think that just goes to, like, we were able to hand those out at farmers markets and start conversations and help people be safe. And I think that's what they're looking for right now from candidates and elected officials and others is, you know, can you meet me where I am with the needs that I have right now? And I really applaud, you know, our senators for their exhaustion and their ability to push through that to keep talking to Vermonters. And I think it just goes to, and it's easier for me to say because I wasn't in the legislature on Zoom for many, many hours. But, you know, most Vermonters are exhausted. And so people will say, oh, it must be so hard to campaign in a pandemic. It's not harder to campaign in a pandemic than it is to do much else. And probably much harder is trying to make sure your kids are okay as they, you know, access school. Kids are struggling, you know, trying to learn. So, you know, I think anything that I've done is just try to be a listening ear to people who are in really difficult situations. And so if anybody wants to connect with me, you know, kesharam.com. My cell phone is 881-4433. Just trying to be there for any Vermonter and any person in Chittenden County who needs me.
Thank you. Thomas Chittenden.
I have to echo what I heard Chris Pearson say. I miss talking to people, shaking their hands, knocking on doors, attending events. It's the best part of being on city council. And people say I'm just saying that, but it's honestly the best part of just talking to people and hearing about what they care about. The worst part of the meetings that go until 3 o'clock in the morning, but you can probably relate to that, Mayor Lott, with some of your Winooski meetings. I will say this, I've been doing a lot of keyboard campaigning, so instant messaging, email. I'm also calling people, and I'm doing more Zooms than I care to ever do again. So when this pandemic is done, I'm gonna refuse to meet people on Zoom because I'm just tired of this format. I'm also, I bought a 16-foot flag with my website on it. So I'm gonna be standing by the roadsides just saying thomaschittenden.com, and that way hopefully people will reach out to me and have a phone call or an email, and they can get to see why I'm running and what I care about. So it is tough to campaign in a pandemic, and I miss walking the neighborhoods. That was going to be my plan this summer, just walk every neighborhood in Chittenden County. If I'm successful in November, and hopefully I will run again in 2022, that's exactly what I'm going to do, because we will get through this storm of the pandemic of COVID-19.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin, how are you connecting with constituents? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. One of the major ways I've been connecting with people is on Front Porch Forum. And I can't tell you how many people thank me for that. And they say I'm somewhat unique, though my late wife says that you can't say that. You're either unique, you're not somewhat unique. But and I do that quite extensively, and people appreciate, they write back, and they get updates from me. But I want to use this 30 seconds or 60 seconds to talk about what I said in my opening remarks. Last year, we changed the Chittenden County Senate District. It will go into effect in 2022. Chittenden County is the largest by far Senate district in the entire country. There is no other, we have 6 senators that 150,000 people have to familiarize themselves with, and frequently they go into the ballot box and they don't know anything but the name of the person. It's a really bad democratic system. The next biggest district in the entire country are 2 districts in Vermont, which have 3 senators. But most every other Senate district in the country is 2 or 1. So that people can get to know 2 or 1 people or a one-on-one race far better than when there's 13 candidates running. So I think that's one of the most important things I've achieved in my tenure here, is breaking up the own district. And it's probably not to my personal advantage, because it helps incumbents when voters don't know the candidates as well, but it's not fair to those voters. So I think we made a major step, and how we redesign the Chittenden district in the next coming session will be very important to the voters of Chittenden County. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kumulia, how are you connecting with voters?
So I am connecting on social media, print media, just anyone who is willing to talk. Not necessarily door knocking, but we are doing lit drops, but absolutely speaking with people who are willing to talk. For me, it's actually been the most exciting part of the entire campaign is just talking with people and better understanding what their wants and needs are, what their expectations are. I guess it would be ideal if I could be in multiple places at once, but that's not the situation. But we'll be hosting town hall style forums on um, Facebook and other social media outlets, as well as just safe social distance meet and greets in some public locations. I want people to know that I am accessible, they can get a hold of me, and I'd like to bring back the idea that I work for the people and that I am there to represent them. So my information's on, golongbt.com, and I can be reached at 825-2378. I encourage people to call if they have questions so that they can truly get to know me. And I think like Senator Sirotkin had said, it's hard to really get to know all of the candidates. So I want to make sure that people understand that I am accessible, and that is my cell phone. So call me.
Thank you. So speaking of the pandemic of COVID-19, I want to ask each of you, what do you think is the biggest impact that we have felt over these past few months? And what are you going to do to mitigate those impacts? I will start with Ms. Rahm on this one.
Thanks, Mayor. So first of all, I don't know if we know the biggest impacts yet. I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm actually professionally doing a project speaking to digitally underserved communities. So people like, limited English speakers, people in geographically isolated areas without great internet access, seniors, people in mobile home communities, migrant farm workers, people with disabilities, just who is truly left behind in this pandemic. How underserved are they? What information are they not getting? We still don't have all of that information, and it's really incumbent upon us to get it. So I'm doing some of that work now. And for example, I was talking to the Somali Bantu community, and one thing they said was it's very hard for them to get a lot of the accurate information about what's going on health-wise, what the new distancing requirements are, et cetera. But there was a rumor that someone came home from work and got fired for asking for gloves at work. And that rumor spread so far throughout the community so quickly that people stopped asking for PPE, whether they were cleaning our hospitals or, working in another high intensity, high exposure area like a grocery store. So, we really have to be thinking about who gets left behind in an emergency and how do we better communicate with them. It's WhatsApp, it's, phone calls, it's a lot of other systems than Facebook and Zoom that are really gourmet for people. I personally wasn't well in April. I don't think I'll ever know what I was sick with. My grandparents were both sick. My grandmother just got out of the hospital for the 4th time after having COVID. And I think one of the lasting impacts is that there's a huge disparity between who lost income, lost family members, lost something very important and dear to them in this pandemic, and others who sort of are kind of complaining that they are, sick of their garden or something, so we really just have to be sensitive to the fact that there's a dramatic difference in those who were more affected. In Vermont, thankfully, we're okay. That also means that we have to be sensitive to what's happening in the rest of the country.
Thank you. Mr. Chittenden,
Yeah,
biggest COVID and what you will mitigate.
Sure. Similar to Kesha, Ram, I agree that it's hard to determine now what the biggest impacts are going to be. I just saw this as a really tough question, and I think people are going to be studying this period of time for generations to come. Businesses are hurting financially and structurally with the uncertainty about the pandemic. Is they don't know when the pandemic is going to subside, so it makes tough decisions even tougher. People are hurting. There are quiet people in this world that felt lonely before this pandemic. And now those feelings have grown, as well as the number of people that feel really isolated. Children are hurting. They long for social interaction. And I worry that this pandemic is going to create a generation of agoraphobes, uncle-ophobes, and germaphobes. So we need to keep that in our lens as we go forward. As far as to mitigate these impacts, we need to use this time of great change as an opportunity to pivot our thinking towards societal approaches that make sense, to upgrade our economy for the information age. So I see us starting to think about things. And as much as I just said I'm tired of Zoom, I think this has forced so many people to get comfortable with this meeting platform that it does open up a lot of other means to get access to government and to different ways to connect people that might otherwise be homebound. So I'm going to turn off of Zoom for at least a couple of years, but then I'm sure I'll start Zooming again.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you. Well, one of the big things we need to focus on is clearly our Vermont economy. And I've been in the middle of this for the last 4 months in my committee, trying to sustain businesses that were failing. And we had to distribute monies in proper fashion and in adequate amounts to our business. And I think we've successfully done that in a large part. We've put out close to $250 million in grants, mostly to our small businesses. But one of the things that I was most concerned with, and ties back to my concern with income inequality, is that in the last round of grants that went out, and this just happened yesterday, the governor, to his credit, had suggested $70 million go to individual Vermonters to help those on unemployment and other consumers in the state of Vermont. The House gave those people zero. And in my committee, I was able to lead the effort to give at least $17 million in supplemental checks to people on unemployment, which will help about 40,000 people who have lost their jobs. So we have the economy of businesses, we have the economy of households, and we have to stay laser focused on making sure that our economy not only sustains itself, but comes out of this on the other end, perhaps even better. And the second part is what other people have meant, is socialization. I can't tell you, I had my 2 grandchildren, and one is 1 and one is 1.5, and they were here during the pandemic, and it just broke my heart to know that they have had no socialization with other kids in the last 5 months of their most formative years.
Thank you. Mr. Long.
Thank you. To echo what everyone else is saying, I think it's hard to really say what the biggest impact is. However, what I'm seeing just immediately is the impact to small business, and the loss of so many small businesses already, and then the projected loss of another 20% over the next 6 months it's extremely concerning. We couple that with the budget shortfalls, the 4.7 billion deficit in the unfunded teacher and state employee fund. It's all concerning, and I guess the last thing that's of concern is the education. So education has shifted a great deal from being in school. There's the concern with the mental health in regards to the social interactions that kids strive need, and we're missing some of that. So I have concerns there, and I think those are just going to be 2 areas that we're going to have to pay attention to.
Thank you. And Senator Pearson.
Thank you. I don't think it's a big mystery, some of the horrors that are coming out of the pandemic. We've had 70,000 Vermonters file for unemployment. We've had food insecurity bubble up, but we already had 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 Vermont kids experiencing food insecurity before the pandemic. We've seen increases and concern of increases in domestic violence incidents. And those are sort of some obvious headlines, but for all of us, people that have kept jobs and are still healthy, there's a great uncertainty in just about day to day. And I think that we're all wrestling with that. Our response so far to the pandemic in the legislature is something I'm quite proud of, in addition to cooperating, working closely with the governor, quickly getting up and running in a remote fashion, allowed us to be a good partner, keeping people safe. We played a leadership role in developing hazard pay for the people that kept going to work, and we're vital to the ongoing economy in our nursing homes and et cetera. We managed to put some investment into broadband. It's not enough. It's not going to connect everybody, but it's a recognition that we haven't been able to do enough investment there, and too many of our neighbors out in the more rural parts of the state are not able to participate in a rural or online schooling, for instance. We managed to get some money into the pocket of our migrant workers, people that are undocumented. And I will say one thing that brings me some hope is the COVID pandemic has refocused us to some degree on our close-knit communities. And that's been very positive to be forced in a way to have a moment to reconnect with neighbors. And I'll say there are some pieces here that weave into how we're going to go about addressing the climate crisis, because that insists that we relocalize our habits and our communities. And so I do see some strength coming out of this, but we're not out of the woods yet. It's a scary time for sure.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear these different perspectives from each of you and just how widespread impacts are from the situation that we find ourselves in. Last call for live call-in questions, 802-862-3966 if someone is watching live and would like to ask a question of the candidates. As we near the end of our time together, I want to ask about impact and what is going to be different for Vermonters and everyone in the state, because you have been elected to the Senate either newly or to continue. I believe I will start with Mr. Chittenden for this one.
So I also struggled a lot with this question, but what I came up with generally is that I hope that over time, my voice in Montpelier will lead to more policies that welcome opportunity, investment, and people to this state, and also more regional coordination leading to better and more efficient services for all. The state has a clear responsibility to manage things like our transportation infrastructure, which plays a very important role in fostering growth of our economy and job creation. Just this past week, Charlie Baker presented to the South Burlington City Council that a long plan for Exit 12B by the Whale's Tails would create 900 net new jobs, high quality, high paying office jobs, by opening up 2 large tech parks to supply chain efficiencies and labor markets, both north and south of the Burlington area. This would also be an opportunity to design the types of infrastructure necessary to address our climate crisis by requiring amenity-oriented park and rides and public transportation coverage efficiencies. I also have ideas on how to free up VTrans funds through sensible use of new technologies previously mentioned, like toll by plate to collect use-based assessment that can be income sensitized. And I have other ideas too about how we can grow our economy in an environmentally smart and friendly way.
Thank you. Senator Sirotkin, what will change for Vermonters if you continue in your role?
What I've been doing in my committee, which is the Housing Committee and the Economic Development Committee, and I like to think of it also as the Labor Committee. I have a focus on income inequality and promoting more affordable housing for the state of Vermont. I will continue to do that. I very much appreciate the statement early on by candidate Long saying that he wants to be a voice for people who have not been heard. And I think that's how I approach this. There's a lot of lobbyists in the state of Vermont and in the State House in Vermont, and there's not really a lobbyist other than the legislators themselves for the average Joe. Issues come forth, and it's amazing how special interests weigh in and direct the debate. But unless we take the time to stand up for the average Vermonter, that voice doesn't get heard. And that's what I want to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Long, what will be different for Vermonters if you are elected to this position?
Thank you. As I mentioned before, I am a small business owner, and I am also a veteran. And I also understand deeply what it means to financially struggle. I feel this extremely deeply, and I feel there are a lot of Vermonters who are hurting. I want them to know that I will represent them in Montpelier. I will be the voice that they feel has been silenced, the voice that they feel hasn't been heard. I will advocate for them in the same way that, I would advocate for my children. I want to bring balance back to what is currently a supermajority. This will allow us to have constructive conversation and come to creative solutions so that we can ask, is increasing taxes the only way to solve this problem? Are we correcting symptoms, or are we actually addressing the real problem? And that's all I have.
Thank you. Senator Pearson, what impact will you have should you be reelected?
Well, thank you. I think the past is somewhat predictive, so I'll just talk about some of the things that I've been able to do as a senator. It was my language to expunge low-level marijuana records automatically, instantly, for up to over 10,000 Vermonters. These are not just sort of a badge that people wear as a burden, but they interrupt employment opportunities, grant opportunities, et cetera. As attitudes have shifted on cannabis, it's important that we take that step. I'm glad we did it. We already talked a little bit about access to primary care. This is another bill that I brought forward. Fair contracts. We passed a bill. This was not in the headlines much, but it was my bill to look at all of those contracts, whether you get your cell phone or sign up for a credit card. All of these are brought to us by corporate America. When you're handed a contract and said, if you want this, sign here. This is not a negotiation. You must deal with this. And those contracts in Vermont have fair provisions that are, you will watch this ripple across the country because they're completely abusive generally, and we have had protection. I was one of the leaders to bring a sustainable funding source forward for water, by the way, out of existing tax revenue. I worked with Senator Sirotkin on a small business portal to make it efficient intersection between small business when they want to interact with state government, not go through 5 or 6 agencies, but one web portal that's still under development. In general, I try to bring forward an attitude of the reality of economic reality for most Vermonters, of trying to highlight climate issues as a crisis that has been too long ignored, and standing up for middle-class families, for our children, for strong education, and for a future that we can look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kesha Ram, what will change for Vermonters should you be elected?
Thanks, Mayor. So I had the benefit of being gone for 4 years after spending my entire 20s in the House, and hearing from people, we miss you, you're missed, your voice would be really valuable here. And I think that comes down to potentially 3 things, and I could be biased, but one being that I would always take the opportunity to try and create more visibility for people who aren't usually seen in the legislature. I'd wear Indian clothes. I'd introduce someone on the floor in Spanish. I would talk about being arrested by the LAPD when I was 13. And people would say, there's nobody else with a story like that reflects mine that's in the legislature. And it's really valuable to know that you're there, and I feel more comfortable going there. Second, it can't be understated the importance of relationships in the building. And I was always a relationship builder. I was always, are the Republicans and the Democrats getting together enough? Are we having enough fun outside of the building? If you ask Congressman Welch, he can barely get the Republicans and Democrats in Washington together for lasagna on his committee at his house. And that hurts the public process. And then finally, sort of related to my first point, but even more so, there was a lot of legislation I introduced that may have been before its time. And before its time means before we had someone in the White House like Donald Trump that made people realize that this country isn't necessarily the one they thought they were living in. And I would introduce legislation to independently investigate use of force by the police, to support Abenaki communities and Abenaki recognition, to change the name of Columbus Day. A lot of these things have gotten many more looks since 2016, since I have not been there. And I'm really excited to go back and keep pushing for more courageous legislation that speaks to the America that we want to be, not the America that we are.
Thank you. So we have time now for closing statements. Each of you can take a minute to just wrap up. What is the last thing that you want to say to viewers? I will start with Senator Sirotkin.
Thank you. And I want to thank you again for hosting this today. I hope I made my point of how important events like this are, given the size of our district. I want to continue my work, if folks will reelect me, representing labor interests, consumer interests, and economic development interests, and housing interests. And I'm uniquely situated as chair of the Economic Development and Housing Committee to do just that. I wanted to just highlight one particular bill. We haven't talked about consumer rights very much, but Senator Pearson mentioned consumer contracts, We passed a little known bill in the state of Vermont that is now having repercussions nationwide. And I've gotten great feedback from people on this, is that when you sign a year-long contract on any consumer good, there's buried in the fine print the provision that it automatically renews at the end of the year. We changed that so that now they have to contact you to let you know that it will be automatically renewed unless you say no. So you have a right to cancel, and they have to affirmatively tell you that. That's the kind of legislation, practical legislation. I view myself as a pragmatist, but it really makes a difference in people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Kumulia Case Long, your closing statement.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's been pleasant. I enjoyed sitting here with all of you, to be honest with you. I guess I would like to leave everyone with Vermont is in need of change. Vermont is calling for a change. I believe that I can be that change. We need a different voice in Montpelier. We need a voice that represents those people who are not being heard. We need a voice that brings a new perspective to the table, a perspective that, as I said before, is going to create constructive conversation. We need to find different solutions to our problems and the things that are plaguing, the issues that are plaguing Vermont. I want to be that voice, and it's my hope that you feel that I can be that voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Mayor Lott, and this has been a good discussion. Even though it's a beautiful day, I hope many people will be watching the archive. It's been a great honor to represent the county for these last 4 years. I would be grateful to have people vote for me again so I can go back. If people want more information, you can find my website, senatorpearson.com. I think, we've talked a lot about the issues, and I hope I've made my perspective clear through our discussion here. One way that maybe makes it easier for people who don't have too much time to focus on Montpelier and the nitty-gritty there, and it can be particularly difficult in these times when Washington and the Trump headlines are enough to turn a lot of people away. And so details of what happens in the State House often get lost. But there are a lot of organizations that I work closely with, whether it's the Nurses Union, the Teachers Union, Planned Parenthood, all have endorsed me. Senator Bernie Sanders has endorsed me. Bill McKibben has endorsed me. The League of Conservation Voters has endorsed me. People that are paying close attention know that the attitude, the spirit, and the policy issues that I bring forward are standing up for regular people. And I'm one of the few people with young kids at home, and I go to Montpelier, and I'd be honored to continue to bring that perspective. I ask for your support in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Kesha Ram.
Thanks again, Mayor, for all your great facilitation, and to my fellow candidates today. If you've made it this far and listened to a majority of this debate, then first of all, bless you. And second of all, if you've heard things you agree with, you disagree with, you don't feel represented in everything we talked about, reach out to us. Your voice matters, and it's really important, and we want to know your personal experience. I know I really carry the stories that I hear with me wherever I go, and want to do that again by taking them with me to Montpelier, whether it's on Zoom or physically, we don't know yet. That I'd be honored to be back in Montpelier serving you and serving as your next Chittenden County State Senator. Again, please reach me. I'm at 881-4433. My website is kesharam.com. I'm pretty easy to find just by my first name. There's no $sign, but it's Kesha, and you can see it on my lawn signs. And I just really would love to be in touch with you, know how you're doing, know how your kids are doing, and together we can move Vermont forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Thomas Chittenden.
The original instructions, it said only 30 seconds, so I had a really short, pithy end, but now I'll just sort of fill the time a little bit with this this comment. And I just want to echo what I just heard Kesha say. What I love about service is talking to people. So if you heard me say anything today that you disagree with, reach out to me, or if you agree with me, of course, as well. But I love talking to people who I disagree with, as well as agree with, because it informs my perspective. And I am always maximally accessible and transparent in all of my elected roles. So that is one of the best parts about elected service, is hearing hearing from people and helping work through issues and understanding perspectives. So don't hesitate to reach out. And I just want to thank all of you for this beautiful Saturday. And I appreciate you mentioning that, Chris Pearson. I actually watched the earlier one too at 1 p.m. and there was like 5 people, because it shows how many people are watching, because it's so nice today. So I too hope you're watching this on some cold, rainy day. But thank you for taking the time to connect with and look at the people that you might be casting a vote for. Most importantly, I do hope that you'll vote for me, Thomas Chittenden, but more importantly, I just hope that you vote. I think this is an exciting opportunity this year to have everybody receive a ballot. This country is better when people speak up, and you speak up at the ballot box. So please cast your vote. And if you do want to find out more about me, including how to reach out, I'm at thomaschittenden.com. I would love to hear from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of our candidates. It's been a pleasure learning more about your views today. Appreciate you spending the time to put this out there to our community. And to viewers, thank you for tuning into Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of statewide and regional candidates. This was part 2 of the Chittenden County State Senate Candidates Forum. As Mr. Chittenden mentioned, there was a first part with some additional candidates for this seat, these seats. You can find this and more forums at www.ch17, that's channel 17.tv. Don't forget to vote on or before November 3rd. Early voting by mail is available by contacting your town clerk's office. Polls will also be open all day on November 3rd from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. This concludes our candidates forum. Thank you again.